The story begins in the most unlikely of places, inside a high-end convenience store on Fifth Avenue, a place where wealth and privilege are so deeply ingrained in the environment that a barefoot child with only a few coins in his hand seems completely out of place. Jamal Washington, just 10 years old, stands in this intimidating setting, clutching 20 cents, a sum so small in such a rich district that it becomes almost a symbol of his desperation. His small request is not for toys or sweets, but for milk for his baby sister who is hungry and crying at home. In this opening scene, his courage and innocence are immediately contrasted with the cruelty of the store manager, who treats him with disdain and threatens to call security. Already, the lines between privilege and need, arrogance and determination are drawn sharply. The story takes a dramatic turn when Theodore Blackstone, a billionaire real estate mogul, enters the store. He's a man who has just completed a deal worth tens of millions of dollars, dressed in wealth and moving through the world as though it belongs to him. For Jamal, he represents the possibility of compassion. The boy appeals to Theodore's humanity, hoping that behind the expensive suit lies a man with a heart. But instead of kindness, Theodore responds with cold arrogance, mocking Jamal, accusing him of inventing sob stories and ultimately trying to humiliate him. He even goes so far as to offer the boy $100 if he kneels before him and apologizes publicly. This moment crystallizes the depth of Theodore's cruelty. He sees a child not as a person but as entertainment, someone he can belittle in front of strangers. Yet Jamal surprises everyone present. He refuses to kneel. He refuses to give in even with his sister's hunger pressing against his conscience. Instead, he speaks with dignity, affirming that his father died serving the country and that a man is measured not by wealth but by character. He calls Theodore the poorest man he has ever met, not because of money but because of values. These words, spoken by a 10-year-old, pierce through Theodore's arrogance and echo in the minds of the crowd. This refusal to be broken is the seed that the entire story grows from. The confrontation escalates further when Theodore threatens Jamal's family, claiming he could have his mother fired from her hospital job with a single phone call. Jamal, instead of crumbling, calmly points out that cameras are everywhere and that people are already recording. This clever acknowledgement of the modern world and its power to hold the powerful accountable frightens Theodore for the first time. For all his wealth, he suddenly appears vulnerable, fearing the judgment of the public. At that moment, Margaret Patterson, a seasoned journalist who has witnessed the event, recognizes the significance of what has unfolded. She approaches Jamal, offers him money for milk and diapers, but more importantly, gives him words of encouragement and a promise of future opportunity. This marks the true beginning of Jamal's transformation. Back in the Bronx, he lives with his mother Kesha, who works tirelessly at multiple jobs to support her children. Their home is poor but filled with love, a love that no billionaire can buy. Margaret becomes a regular presence in their lives, supporting Jamal's education, discovering that he is gifted and nurturing his mind. Jamal himself begins to write down ideas in a secret notebook. He calls his project Project Justice, not simply as a way to get revenge on Theodore, but as a careful, strategic plan to understand how men like Theodore operate, how they escape consequences, and how, eventually, they can be brought down. At 10 years old, he is already studying power with the precision of a future lawyer. Margaret teaches him the distinction between revenge and justice. Revenge is driven by emotion, often self-destructive, while justice is methodical, patient, and benefits society as a whole. She teaches him that powerful men like Theodore have three great weaknesses: their ego, their money, and their reputation. If one of these collapses, the others inevitably follow. Jamal internalizes this lesson and makes a note that becomes the central philosophy of his life. The best revenge is not punishing someone for the past, but creating a future where they become irrelevant. With this mindset, he turns his humiliation into fuel for growth. 15 years later, the boy from the Bronx is no longer barefoot. Jamal Washington has become a Harvard-trained lawyer, a federal prosecutor specializing in financial crimes, and one of the sharpest minds in his field. When the FBI storms Theodore Blackstone's offices with search warrants, Jamal is the one leading them. The moment of their reunion is as dramatic as their first encounter. Theodore, now older but still arrogant, is shocked to see the same child who once begged for milk standing before him as the prosecutor who has built the case that will bring his empire down. Jamal reminds him of the promise he made, that he would pay him back when he grew up. Now that promise has arrived in the form of indictments, evidence, and accountability. The evidence against Theodore is overwhelming. Offshore accounts, bribery, corruption, illegal evictions, all meticulously documented over 15 years. Jamal even uses Theodore's own arrogance against him, playing recordings of the times he mocked the boy and bragged about humiliating him. These recordings, combined with Margaret's investigative work, seal his fate. For the first time, Theodore realizes that he is no longer untouchable. His connections in politics are collapsing, his allies arrested, and his reputation disintegrating in real time. Stocks crash, contracts are canceled, and the empire he spent decades building begins to crumble in a matter of days. The arrest of Theodore Blackstone becomes a defining moment in New York's history. Jamal, now in his mid-20s, makes it clear that his actions are not about personal revenge. He is not celebrating the suffering of one man, but rather the restoration of dignity for thousands of families who were harmed by Theodore's greed. His words emphasize that true justice is collective, not individual. He has kept his promise not only to himself, but to his community, transforming the pain of one child into the redemption of many. 3 years later, the transformation is even more evident. The skyscraper that once bore Theodore's name now houses the Jamal Washington Social Justice Center, providing free legal aid to poor families. Jamal has become one of the most respected figures in the fight against financial corruption, responsible for recovering billions of dollars and returning dignity to countless communities. His younger sister, once the crying baby who sparked the desperate plea for milk, is now excelling in school and preparing to follow his path in law. His mother, who once collapsed from exhaustion, has risen to become a hospital director, her sacrifices finally rewarded. Meanwhile, Theodore languishes in prison, abandoned by his family, stripped of his wealth and left with nothing but the memory of his arrogance. He once laughed at humiliating a child, but now lives as a humiliated man himself, forgot by society. His downfall is not only personal but symbolic. It demonstrates that power without morality is fragile, that cruelty often plants the seeds of its own destruction, and that arrogance can blind even the richest man to the inevitability of justice. Jamal, in interviews, is asked whether his promise to pay back the humiliation of that day has been fulfilled. He explains that not only has it been fulfilled, it has multiplied. The 20 cents that once represented desperation has been transformed into billions recovered for victims of corruption. The humiliation that once seemed unbearable has been turned into education, strength, and justice. He makes it clear that the true power of his story is not in revenge, but in the ability to create a better system where men like Theodore can no longer thrive. The story closes with Jamal preparing to enter politics, announcing his candidacy for the Senate. His campaign is funded not by corporations but by ordinary families who believe in him because they have seen what he has already done for them. His mission is not personal glory but structural change. Theodore, watching from his prison cell, realizes with bitter irony that the boy he once dismissed as a beggar has become the man shaping the very future of the country. The narrative, when examined in its entirety, becomes much more than the story of a personal rivalry. It is a modern parable about dignity, perseverance, and the transformative power of injustice when met with resilience. It illustrates how a single cruel act can ripple through time, not only destroying the perpetrator but inspiring a movement that reshapes society. Jamal's promise of repayment was never about 20 cents. It was about proving that human worth is not determined by wealth or social status, but by courage, integrity, and the determination to use personal pain as a foundation for collective justice. The story resonates because it speaks to something universal, the longing for justice in a world where inequality often seems permanent. Jamal embodies the hope that with patience, preparation, and resilience, even the most powerful oppressors can be brought down. Theodore embodies the warning that arrogance and cruelty eventually destroy themselves. The encounter between these two men becomes a metaphor for the struggle between oppression and resistance, between arrogance and dignity, between greed and justice. What makes it powerful is that it begins with something so small, a barefoot child holding 20 cents, and ends with the transformation of entire communities and the rewriting of history. It reminds us that injustice can break Piop,